Hi friends, this is Angelica. Thanks for joining me here on the Greetery YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be introducing 4 new products from the Harvest Fest collection, which will be in the Greetery shop tomorrow morning. I'm going to walk you through the products and then I'm going to share how I put this card together. So the first 2 products that we're going to be looking at is the Fall Folk die and Plump Pumpkins die. These dies coordinate perfectly together, or you can use them alone. A quick note on the pumpkin dies: the ones that will be in the shop will have a closed back. The opening backing leaves an impression, so Betsy had that fixed. So just know that your dies are going to look different than mine. Okay, so we're going to start by making pumpkins first. I die cut Nina's Solar White 110-pound cardstock, and I'm going to ink them with Distress Oxide inks. I've picked Carved Pumpkin, Ripe Persimmon, and Vintage Photo inks to use. I want the light source to look like it's coming from the upper right corner, so I'm going to be pretty heavy-handed with the brown ink on the left side of the pumpkin. And the way that I like to ink my die cuts is I start with the lightest color and I just do a quick coat of that color over the whole die cut and then work towards the darker color and then come back to the first color, kind of blending the colors out, but I don't want it to be completely blended out. I do want to have different values throughout the pumpkin so it doesn't look perfect, if that makes sense. Now for the stems, I am going to color them with Ground Espresso Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm going to splatter some brown ink onto the pumpkins before moving on to the next set of pumpkins that we're going to put together. So for these next pumpkins, I am going to be using colored cardstock. I die cut orange pumpkins, and then I used the Fall Folk die to die cut the carving out of the pumpkins. I already have 2 pumpkins I put together by doing like paper piecing. It did take me a long time, so I ended up not putting that in this video, but I wanted to show what it looked like if you die cut a whole bunch of cardstock colors with the folk art or fall folk die. You can make really pretty colored designs, or you can do white cardstock and use your markers or paint to color the little pieces. But for time's sake, on screen, I'm just going to back the die cut pumpkins with brown pumpkins so you can see how pretty the fall folk details are on the pumpkins. Now we're going to move on to a new stencil set. This is the Fall Folk stencil set. It has 5 stencils in it and then a stenciled guide that has a full-size example on the guide. Each stencil does have an A2 size rectangle around the stencil, so you can line up your A2 size panels to the stencil. And I'm going to be stenciling on my waffle flower grip mat. This is what you're going to be seeing me stencil on from now on. This is a great tool for stencils. So I put my panel down, I'm going to line up my stencil, and then I'm just going to push that stencil into the mat, and the mat's just going to grip it and hold it into place for me. So this first stencil is going to add the leaves. I'm using Concord and Ninth inks for all of my stenciling with this set. I'm starting with Tide Pool, and you saw how nice that grip mat was holding on to the stencil. So for the second stencil, I'm going to use Cayenne ink, and then again, I'm going to get that stencil, and you can see how this folk art is just really coming to life. I think this is such a fun stencil set. The third ink was Avocado, and then Sunflower I picked for the yellow. And a side note about these inks that I'm using, they did not stain my stencils or the grip mat, so I was pleasantly surprised about that. I usually have pretty bad luck with brown inks, purple inks. I didn't use purple today, but those 2 inks are usually highly pigmented and they will stain my work surface, especially my silicone mats. So that they left no stain behind really made me happy. This is the first time I had used the brown ink, so I was wondering if that was going to happen, and it didn't. Now, I did use whatever ink was left on my brown brush to ink the edges of this panel. I wanted to age it a little bit, and now I'm going to splatter some brown ink onto the panel. This fall folk stencil set reminded me of basic gray paper. I loved basic gray paper back in the early 2000s, and I wanted to mimic their very distressed look, which made me fall in love with them. I love a grungy look. Now we're going to move on to sentiments, and I'm going to use the new Thanks Always stamp set, and there is a coordinating die set sold separately to die cut the larger words in this stamp set. I am going to be doing heat embossing. I wanted to do gold heat embossing on black cardstock. So I'm going to pull out my Mini Misty and prep some black cardstock to heat emboss on. I'm going to use VersaFine Versamark, excuse me, I had to wait for it to come on screen. Versamark embossing ink to stamp the words with, and then I'm going to pour Tailored Expressions gold embossing powder over the words and tap off the excess. I'm going to pull out a couple tools to get rid of a few flakes that were left behind before I use my heat tool to melt the powder. Once I have the embossing powder melted, I do have a Swiffer sheet that I keep in my desk, which I will wipe the panel down with, and that's going to pick up any leftover anti-static powder that's on the black cardstock that's giving it that kind of gray look because the anti-static powder is white. So I'm going to brush that away with the Swiffer sheet and then attach the dies to the words, and I'm very careful putting the dies on the words because these are very delicate words and the die is not like really see-through. And I'm also using a lot of tape. I'm using painter's tape, which has a pretty strong hold to it, so that they don't move in the die cut machine. So all that's left to do now is to put the card together. I've already trimmed the Fall Folk panel down and attached it to a card base. I'm going to add the pumpkin to the card base with thin foam squares, and I'm taking my time putting that pumpkin down because I don't want to have to redo the background. So I'm just being careful with my placement, and then I'm going to top the pumpkin with the Happy Thanksgiving sentiment. I really like the font of this Thanksgiving. I think it's really pretty, really elegant, and it matches this background really nicely. So this finishes the introduction to the new Plump pumpkins and Fall Folk die and stencil. You can find more details on these new products and on the rest of the release over on the Greetery blog, so be sure to head over there. There is lots to see, there's lots of projects to look at, and I'm telling you, this release is gorgeous. The Harvest Fest collection will be available in the Greetery shop tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time, so be ready to get some shopping done. I want to thank you again for joining me, and I want to thank the Greetery for letting me introduce these products to you. That's all that I have for now. Take care, friends.